waiting room and our chat. So thank you, Rachel, for that. Um, well, hello everybody, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us on a Tuesday evening. We're excited to have you. My name is Rachel Seets. I am the North Texas Conservation Manager with Native Prairies Association of Texas. I know quite a few of you already, but for the folks that I haven't met yet, welcome. I hope I get a chance to speak with y'all at some point, and thank you for joining. So my primary role with Native Prairies Association of Texas is closing conservation easements. So this is most of what I do. I work closely with landowners across the North Texas region to help establish these agreements on their properties. So I love this work. I love being a part of conservation progress in the region, and I'm excited to talk about conservation easements with y'all today. So, quick overview of what I'll be discussing. I'll touch briefly on NPAT for those of you that are unfamiliar with us. Then we'll dive into some land conservation in Texas, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty of Conservation Easements 101. After that, we've got a couple great landowners that are going to be joining us to provide their testimonial. So we'll do something of a Q&A with them. And at the end, there will be time for answering everyone's questions. I'm hoping y'all showed up with quite a few already. I'm hoping y'all write down questions as I'm presenting. Feel free to pop those into the chat. Like I said, we have Rachel Weaver here today to kind of help track those questions in the chat and ask them in the Q&A at the very end. Okay, so like I said, first thing I'd like to talk about Native Prairies Association of Texas, introduce us to those who are unfamiliar. So we are a statewide nonprofit founded in 1986. We were founded by a group of Texans that were deeply concerned with how rapidly our Texan prairies were disappearing due to the big influx of population in our state. So they founded our organization almost 40 years ago with the mission of conserving prairie land through protection, stewardship, and community. We have 8 staff statewide, so we are lean and mean. I am one of those staff members. We also have a few other teammates here today. I'll point out our executive director, Amber Arsenault, is here on the call. She is our and my conservation easement encyclopedia. And it's going to be a great resource for the Q&A to fill in any gaps that I can't during that session. Like I said, we have a new teammate, Rachel Weaver here. We also have another new teammate. I think Andy is here. He has been a huge help with our land management. And Jeff Sargent is here as well. So those are just some of our teammates. So we are a conservation organization and we are a land trust. So being a land trust, the primary methods that we use towards land protection are fee simple ownership, so just outright ownership of a property, and through conservation easements, which is what I will be talking the most about today. Just to give you a quick rundown of what we protect, what's within our management, we own outright fee simple 11 properties. And additionally, we hold 22 conservation easements in partnership with the private landowners on those properties. So we are also a membership association with a fantastic network of regional chapters. These chapters are involved in a variety of community engagement and prairie stewardship efforts, whether that's restoration projects, field outings, group plant and wildlife surveys. They table at community events and they also host their own educational opportunities. So really rich network of chapters that y'all are welcome to look into if you're wanting to get involved with prairie efforts, connect with fellow prairie enthusiasts in your area. This is a map of where those 5 chapters are currently. So we have up in the top in the north of Texas, we've got 3 chapters. Blackland Prairies over towards the west. So that comprises Weatherford, Fort Worth area, and the counties both north and south of there. And then towards the east, we have our Blackland Prairie And this is Dallas and Collin County and the surrounding counties. And excitingly, we have a newly formed Northeast Texas chapter. There is some truly remarkable, beautiful prairie land up in Northeast Texas, and even more remarkable than the prairie land are some of the landowners and prairie stewards up there. So they've formed a group and have some really great events up there. That's something we're really excited about. And further south, we've got a couple chapters, the Houston and Fayette Prairie. So Fayette is between College Station, Houston, and Austin, and then we have over in the east southeast we have the Houston chapter. So a lot of different volunteer chapters to get involved with. Should you be in the area, it's by no means a geographic limitation. If you're located outside of there, you're more than welcome to attend these events. So highly recommend popping onto our website. You'll see all of their events on our calendar. So, when we talk about conservation easements, we're talking about a tool that's being used towards land conservation in Texas. I'd like to zoom out a bit and talk for a minute about the why. Why do we need to conserve land in Texas? And it's likely I'll be preaching to the choir a bit here. But I'll start with some of the challenges Texas is facing today, just a small dose of doom and gloom, and then we'll move right back into some hope, into solutions, and into some of the incredible work being done across the state to address these challenges, which includes conservation easements. So, what are some of the challenges we're experiencing in Texas? So, we've experienced some wild population growth over the past 25 years. So in 2000, our population was just under 21 million, and we are now sitting at 31.5 million people in 2025. So we've gained about 10 million people, or 150% population increase in just the past 25 years. And even still, we're one of the fastest growing states in the country. Back in 2023 to 2024, we came in second for fastest growing state in the US. Quick aside, can anybody guess what the first fastest growing state is? Any guesses? Can't see the chat. Hold on, let me pull the chat back up. It's Florida. Florida is the number one fastest growing state, and then we are second to them. I'm not sure why Florida, being so pale, it sounds like a nightmare, but I'm sure I know people love the beaches. Anyway, so as we all know, Texas is an awesome place. People are flocking here for our state's economy, job opportunities. We have affordable living and a warm climate. And with this influx of people comes the transformation of this formerly open, rural, and wild space in Texas. Let me just pop out here. This is a really great graphic. Can y'all see this video? So this is a really great graphic put together by another land trust called the Texas Land Conservancy. It's a video of 40 years of growth in the Frisco area, which for those of you who aren't familiar with Frisco, this is a suburban city just 30 miles north of Dallas. And it's something that it shows just how quickly development can occur, and a lot of metroplexes and suburban areas around metroplexes are seeing this exact same story over the years. So really great representation of what we're dealing with when it comes to fragmentation of land and how quickly development can happen. So back to our slide. So this video, like I said, or that video of what we saw, I got the audio still from that, is happening across the state. It's kind of concentrated in the DFW, San Antonio, and Houston metroplexes. Sometimes folks call this the Texas Triangle. So this is where the majority of our population lives and where rapid development is taking place. So this region has long been flagged as a priority in the conservation community. So like I said, this Texas Triangle is where a lot of urbanization and population is concentrated, as y'all can imagine. It is also the most fragmented part of our state, experiencing high amounts of habitat degradation and a loss of continuous or connected land. So, with this development, we're seeing more and more of the picture here. These, 500 home, multiple hundred home neighborhoods going in where there originally were large tracts of open space or farmland. I'll just take a quick moment to say that I live in a neighborhood that looks exactly like this. So, we're not necessarily against development by any means, but we do want to advocate for the thoughtful and proactive protection of critical landscapes, including prairies, in order to set ourselves up and our future residents up for a sustainable future. Um, so, as we can all imagine, this fragmentation of habitat and the new impervious structures that are resulting, the roads, foundations, parking lots, these pose significant threats to the natural resources and the wildlife of our state. I've mentioned the most direct challenge posed by urban sprawl and development, that being land fragmentation. Um, but we also see increased pollution as a result of this rapidly expanding population. So this is a flyover shot from 2013, so a little over a decade ago. You can see our major cities here, and it's a great photo that to show the struggles we have with some of our light pollution in the state. So this is what the migrating bird species are seeing as they are attempting to migrate through Texas down the Central Flyway. Texas Central Texas is home to I-35, where tons of Texans travel, and similarly, it's home to the I-35 for many migrating bird species. So a lot of them, they navigate by star and moonlight at night, and they're often disoriented by the light pollution. And this is just one of the many issues posed by excess light pollution for wildlife. Luckily, it's commonly said that light pollution is one of the more hopeful problems we have when it comes to pollution, as oftentimes it's as simple as turning off the lights, installing effective shields to prevent unnecessary light shining upward into the sky. This is another more recent image from August 2023. This is NASA's air pollution map. As you'd expect, we see higher levels of, major pollutants like nitrogen dioxide present in areas with these higher populations in that Texas triangle on the corners of that Texas triangle. So those are just a few examples of some of the challenges we're experiencing with this influx of population. It just comes with higher pressures, higher levels of disturbance, and it just calls to mind how the importance of preserving land while we can. It's kind of a race against time. So to expand on some of the changes we're seeing in our state, and we're using some really great images from the Texas Land Trends report that's developed by Texas A&M's Natural Resources Institute. These are just a few of of the graphics available. If this is of interest to you, I'd highly recommend Googling the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute and their Texas Land Trends report to check out and learn more. But what we're seeing here with these three images, the one on the left is the shift in the type of land use that we're seeing. So it's the rate of working land conversion. So over the course of 20 years, from 1997 to 2017, you see approximately 2.2 million acres of open working lands converted to non-agricultural uses. And of course, they're mainly concentrated to that Texas Triangle. Second image in the top right here is a map of the fastest growing counties. And this is not just in the state, these are some of the fastest growing counties in the nation. You'll see that this growth is now occurring around the Metroplexes, so not in Austin, Dallas, Houston, but in the counties surrounding. So that's brings to mind the term urban sprawl, the spread of development. And then this last image is the change in market value, so an increase in land value. The largest increases in land values just correlate with the fast growth. So you have much more expensive pieces of land in this Texas triangle now. So this isn't shown in an image. But the last stat I'll touch on is a decrease in ownership size. So that is, we're experiencing a decrease in average property size purchased. So as properties are getting smaller, approximately 85% of all property ownerships are on tracts that are less than 500 acres in size. So we're losing our natural lands, and as more and more people are moving here, and it's becoming more and more expensive to purchase land, which adds to the dilemma of land conservation in Texas. So I talk about all of these shifts and these pressures on the land, but it's also important to talk about what's at stake here. Open natural space provides innumerable critical services for us and for wildlife. These are often referred to as ecosystem services. That's the fancy term for it. I won't go into all of these listed here, but essentially, wildland is essential to our daily lives. To highlight a primary example and one of the most important examples, water. Water quality and quantity are both directly related to the health of the lands that run along our streams and stretch above our recharge lands that contribute to the aquifers beneath our feet, so our drinking water and our rivers and streams. So water can't penetrate through the impervious cover we see in paved areas. It needs a healthy diversity of plant roots and soil to absorb the water and percolate down into our aquifers. We also have food. Open space is responsible for the food we eat, both from an agricultural standpoint and from a habitat perspective. So open land provides habitat for pollinators, which are responsible for one in every three bites of food that we eat. There's plenty more ecosystem services here, but those are just a few very important examples among many of how wildland supports our lives and that of local wildlife as well. And I'm not even mentioning the inherent value of wild spaces to our well-being. Okay, so we talked about what we need to protect and why. So what does land conservation look like in Texas? We know what we want to protect and why. How are we going about this? So this is a map of publicly protected lands in Texas that everyone has access to. These are your national and state parks, your local city parks as well. And this map, as you can see, is relatively sparse, especially when we're thinking about comparison to other states. So public land in Texas makes about 3 to 4% of the total land mass, which, fun fact, Texas is about 170 million acres, in case anybody's curious. So this 3 to 4% is far less than most states. For example, 29% of Florida is public, 43% of Colorado, and 70% of Idaho, respectively. So we are pretty low when it comes to total land mass and what's publicly accessible and protected. Now we've made some progress towards this end. Back in 2023, Texas voters approved Proposition 14, which created a $1 billion Centennial Parks Conservation Fund. So that'll be used towards acquiring and developing new parks. So, but we still have quite a ways to go when it comes to being competitive with other states. So, 3 to 4% publicly protected lands. The other remaining 96% of land in Texas is privately owned. So, when we are talking about land protection in Texas, private landowners are a critical and massive part of that conversation. Like I said, so these are our two ways of protecting land in Texas, either through our state public park program or partnering with private landowners. So, when we're talking about protecting private land, we're talking about the work of land trusts. So, what exactly is a land trust? So, land trust is a nonprofit that works to conserve land in the public interest through land transactions. And I'll get into different examples of those land transactions. Typically, they're a 501c3 or nonprofit like us. You can also find them in the form of governmental or quasi-governmental agencies. So, these would be um, your cities, your municipalities, your counties. It could also be your local soil and water conservation districts that can engage in these transactions. So I won't read all of these to you, but this is just a neat history of some of the land conservation milestones in the U.S. and Texas. We have in the U.S., so the very first city park was in 1634 in Boston Common. First park in Texas, San Pedro Springs Park. And then further down, you have your very first land trust, which was the Trustees of Reservations in Massachusetts. They're still operating today. And then the first land trust in Texas was back in 1964, which is the Nature Conservancy of Texas. Later on, we got the Clean Water and Endangered Species Acts, and later you have the enablement of conservation easements in the Texas legislature in 1983. So in the 2000s, that's when you started seeing these conservation easements become a little more strengthened. So they were enhanced in 2006, and in 2015, they are now a conservation easement is now permanent. So when you establish a conservation easement on your property, that is in perpetuity. So, as a land trust, we have a few different options for conserving land. We can own land outright, like I mentioned, otherwise known as fee simple. We have 11 fee simple properties, where we have complete ownership of the property and are responsible for its management. Another tool or option we prefer to use and primarily use is the conservation easement, which is the topic of today's webinar. So a high-level definition of a conservation easement would be a voluntary legal agreement that a landowner establishes on their property in partnership with a land trust like ourselves. This agreement restricts certain land usages in order to protect conservation values. And I will expand on what exactly that means here in a little bit. So either one of these things, fee simple or conservation easements, can be acquired through purchase or through donation. Being a nonprofit with a smaller capacity, we do not do a lot of purchasing. So many of the conservation easements that we partner with landowners on are donated, which I'll get into that, what that means being a donated easement in a little bit as well. Um, on occasion, there are opportunities to receive funds from city, county bonds, state or federal grants, and private foundations. Another tool I'll quickly touch on in the toolbox that NPAT doesn't do, but other land trusts do, is conservation or mitigation banking. This is land that's essentially put aside to compensate for land that is being converted by development elsewhere. It's kind of similar to carbon offsets in that way, except you're using land acreage. So Native Prairies Association of Texas is just one land trust of a large network across the country. There's over 1,200 active land trusts in the country that collectively protect 61 million acres of land in the United States. So some of you may have heard of the backbone organization, Land Trust Alliance. We are members of this umbrella organization, along with 947 other land trusts in that network. So collectively, these efforts really add up. It's amazing to be a part of that work, and our 7,000 acres of protected land contributes to that collective protected acreage. So we are also members of the statewide organization, Texas Land Trust Council, similar to Land Trust Alliance. This is just a statewide network of the land trusts that work and are active in the state of Texas. Each land trust has their own mission and an area of operation. We'd highly, highly recommend visiting the Texas Land Trust Council's website to learn more about the different land trusts that operate here in Texas, and even reaching out to some to see if your interests align and how they might be able to best fit your goals for the property. There are some really great organizations here in Texas, including Native Prairies Association of Texas. So something to ask about when working with a land trust is whether they're accredited. This is an additional step that land trust can go through that requires rigorous reporting to show that the organization is financially stable. That shows that they keep good records and they have the standard procedures in place to ensure that this land protection is permanent. So we, NPAT, are accredited. So I mentioned Texas Land Trust Council and all of the land trusts that are active in the state. This is a map from that council that shows all of the protected lands, all of the lands that these collective land trusts in Texas are protecting. It totals about 1.9 million acres across the state. Its number is likely higher now. They update this every couple of years, so we're looking forward to seeing the new map here soon. You'll see there's a concentration of properties in the hill country along the coastline, some in North Texas, Trans-Pecos, and there's something of a gap kind of in the middle. There's a gap in North Texas, and then there's a gap towards the center of that Texas triangle. So something to keep in mind, and that organizations like us are keeping in mind. Um, this is just another representation of conserved lands by county. Again, concentration of protection towards the coastline, which is important. Hill country, another crucial ecoregion in Trans-Pecos, where there's millions or tons and tons of acreage protected over there. Again, you have something of a gap up in North Texas, where a lot of our prairie land, North and Central Texas, where the majority of our prairie land lies. And this is just a quick shot of the ecoregions. So conservation easements have grown significantly in popularity over the last 20 years. The majority of conservation easements in the state have actually happened, like I said, in the last 20 years. So this is a graph representing that. There's been a huge influx of protected acreage as more and more landowners become aware of what conservation easements are and what they offer to landowners. So, the Texas Land Trust Council released a report in 2019 that basically communicates the economic importance of the lands that are protected in Texas by land trusts. So, that map I showed earlier of those collectively protected 1.9 million acres. This report essentially puts a dollar amount to the ecosystem services I mentioned before, and the analysis found that these protected lands bring over $1 billion in annual benefits to Texas taxpayers. So natural resource and community benefits like flood mitigation, water, and economic productivity, agricultural production, wildlife benefits. So while we know that land protection carries an invaluable benefit to us, this report is extremely helpful when it comes to communicating the value of land protection to a wider audience and to policymakers. So uh, neat stat there. So let's dive into conservation easements. We've got a little 101 here, and like I said, we'll be answering any questions you may have after at the end of the webinar. So I mentioned the definition before, and I'll say it again here. So conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement that restricts types and amounts of land usage in order to protect the property's conservation values. A couple of things of note. I'd like to put an emphasis on the word voluntary here. There is sometimes a misconception that conservation easements are forced. They are certainly not. It's a willing landowner that approaches a land trust in the hopes of protecting their property. Another important word is landowner. A second common misconception with conservation easements is that landowners lose their property or they lose ownership of their property when they establish a conservation easement, which is not true. Landowners retain ownership of their properties with a conservation easement in place. These are specific and highly customizable agreements. and they're based on the goals of the landowner. So you remain the owner. You are on the deed as the owner of the land. After the conservation easement, you can sell the property to a third party. Your kids can inherit the land, and the conservation easement will travel with the land in perpetuity. So I say that word perpetuity. That is an amazing strength of conservation easements. They are forever. So as long as we have a structured government in place, these easements will hold. So once final, the conservation easement will be filed at the courthouse. And like I said, it travels with the land. So any future owner or buyer after you is beholden to the parameters of this conservation easement. So this is a super common graphic used to expand on the definition of conservation easement. So landowners have a bundle of rights included with their ownership of the property. You have the right to lease for hunting, for timber, for grazing, mineral rights, which sometimes landowners don't have anymore, but these are all rights that come along with the property. And with those rights, you also have development rights as one of those sticks in that bundle of rights. So when you establish a conservation easement, oh, Katie, sorry, my cat got onto my keyboard. Buddy. So with those, when you establish a conservation easement, the landowner is basically donating or selling the development rights over to the land trust, and we will retain those in perpetuity. And the landowner, of course, retains ownership and can still collect on all of the other rights that are mentioned here. So when I mentioned that conservation easements can be purchased or donated, I have a little chart here to discuss that more in depth. Landowners uh, commonly and often and reasonably want to know how compensation works for these transactions. And there are a couple options, like I said. So I'll go through these with an example. I am not an Aggie, but Amber, our director, often refers to this chart as Aggie math, which I enjoy. So we're going to be hopping into a little bit of Aggie math here. So you have an example of a property here that is worth $2 million, and that is prior to the conservation easement. Um, Now, without the conservation easement in place, this property owner is able to use their development rights to subdivide and develop their property. So they can add a neighborhood with 200 homes, a Target, they can add a Starbucks to the property. That is a right that they hold as the landowner. And this right carries a certain value on the property, a certain amount of the value of the property. So when the conservation easement is in place, like I mentioned before, the landowner is donating or selling their development rights to the land trust, which greatly restricts the amount and type of construction that can take place on the property. So when we restrict these usages, we are affecting the value of the property. This landowner can no longer add all of these homes, Starbucks, Target, etc. So this value in the case of this example property is roughly 30% of the total value of the property. So that would be $600,000 of this $2 million property. Now, let's imagine we've closed the easement. It's officially filed with the county clerk and on the title of the property. With the conservation easement in place, the new value of the property is going down from $2 million. Oops, so sorry. What did I do here? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen really quick. Sorry about that, guys. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so like I said, with the easement in place, we have a value afterwards of $1.4 million. So, folks are going to see this and think, okay, so what happens to that $600,000, the value of the conservation easement? How is that value compensated? So there's a couple options. Commonly, landowners can donate this value. The IRS will recognize this as a charitable donation that the landowner is then able to declare off their income taxes for up to 15 years. I'll also importantly add that we are by no means financial advisors. So this is not financial advice or tax advice. It's just what we've learned, and definitely recommend connecting with your CPA for more details on declaring income tax deductions. So landowners can donate this value and they can also choose to sell the value of the conservation easement. So like I mentioned before, Texas is more limited in the funding available. So conservation easements are commonly donated. Should a landowner wish to sell, otherwise referred to as a purchased agreement, the land trust would help seek funding for this transaction, which is often very competitive. So one major source of funding available would be money through the federal government, through the NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So this is federal funding that landowners can apply for in partnership with the land trust. Again, it is competitive and they typically pay for about half of the value of the conservation easement. So in this case, the landowner would receive payment in the form of about $300,000. The other 50% that's not received in payment can still be declared as a charitable donation. So when a portion of the conservation easement value is purchased, this is referred to as a bargain sale. And this is an extremely common approach to purchased easements in the state. So it really depends on your area. There is also some funding available through the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Some counties and municipalities have bond funding available to support the purchase of easements. There are also some private funders that can help support purchases. But like I said, this funding is more limited in our state, and landowners commonly opt for donated easements. So that's the majority of what we deal with, and Pat deals with. Okay, so there's certain requirements to be a conservation easement. So the property must protect, or the conservation easement must protect one of the following amongst natural wildlife habitat, open space, historical preservation, and public use. So most properties that we're working with being prairie oriented, check these top two boxes, natural wildlife habitat and open space. The following two are less common. Um, Sometimes a property will have less open land and be more focused on historical preservation. So that does happen. The last one, public use, is far less common as most property owners do not wish to have public access to their property. This is typically referring to the easements that your counties and municipalities are holding. So, one of the greatest aspects of a conservation easement is its flexibility. These are highly customizable to the landowner's long-term wishes for the property. But these are some of the common threads that you'll see across conservation easements, and what is allowed and not allowed. So, the primary purpose of the conservation easement is ultimately to protect the conservation value of the property itself. So all restrictions and all of what's allowed are revolving around ensuring those values and that the land are conserved. So no surface mining is allowed with a conservation easement. You'll also see some pretty like strong um, strong limitations on subdivision and strong limitations on development. So subdivision meaning the amount of times you're able to divide the property, and then development meaning the amount you're able to build. So we want to preserve as much of the open space on the property as possible. So landowners are, when we're talking about the conservation easement, when we're drafting the conservation easement, we're having conversations with landowners where they're essentially designating areas on the property where they will allow for future construction. So those are referred to as building envelopes. I need some water. I think I'm running out of oxygen. All right. Landowners will retain the right to outdoor recreation. So, perfectly permissible within a conservation easement is your agriculture, hunting, outdoor recreation, and the public does not have access to the property. That is another common misconception with conservation easements. Is, oh, once you have a conservation easement in place, that means that the public now has access to my property. That is certainly not the case. It is still privately owned property, and no one is going on that property unless the owner deems that fit. Why do a conservation easement? What benefits are in it for landowners and in placing these intensive restrictions on their properties? And why would they want to give up, that extra development value on the property? So a few benefits come to mind. The conservation easement protects your land along with the open space and wildlife habitat present. And there's the conservation easement works in perpetuity, which is a real strength of the conservation easement. Like I said, that you also can have some income tax benefits, some financial benefits. So you are able to, if you donate the conservation easement, you're able to declare that donation as a charitable donation off of your income taxes over the course of 15 years. Um, Likewise, as far as other financial benefits, we looked at that chart earlier. Oftentimes, the price of the property is decreased when you incur a conservation easement on it. And so this is helpful when you're thinking about estate planning, when you're thinking about who's going to be inheriting the property, especially when it comes to property taxes. So it might lower property taxes. Again, not tax advice. And you are also gaining the land trust, a new partner and a lifelong partner in the land trust, a permanent partner in the land trust. So we are a partner that is committed to the protection of your property. So should the conservation easement ever be breached, the land trust, we are going to be acting on your behalf and on the conservation easement's behalf, using our funding and power to enforce the conservation easement. And last and often the most important benefit and what brings many landowners is their desire to conserve the property they love in perpetuity. So whether they want to protect the family legacy, maybe there is a long history of ranching, the property has been in the family for generations, and the owners are wanting to take extra measures to ensure its protection. Maybe a property has come into ownership more recently, and the landowner wants to ensure it will be there long after them. A conservation easement is often a huge weight off of an owner's shoulders. So once the easement is in place, what are your responsibilities as the landowner? What is required of y'all after that is finalized? They're pretty minimal. The landowner needs to require annual monitoring. So we'll come out once a year to make sure that the conservation easement is being held. And we will give ample communication. We will never show up unannounced. And we will coordinate that with your schedule. We love to work with landowners' schedules. Landowners are required to notify us prior to transfer. So if they're aware of the transfer of property, we ask that they please let us know. And like I said before, y'all are required to pay property taxes still. And then what are our responsibilities? So if you choose to partner with NPAT as your partnered land trust on the conservation easement, our responsibilities. So like I said before, we come out for annual monitoring. This is Amber here out on the property doing some annual monitoring. So that involves travel, time in the field, and an annual monitoring report that we keep on file, which is all part of the accreditation process. We're also responsible for potential enforcement if necessary. So should we come out for an annual monitoring visit and find that the owner has breached the conservation easement, maybe they've built a paved road or done some management that was not allowed or permitted in the conservation easement, we can take legal action to correct. So we don't want anything to get to that point. We're very mindful to build relationships with future owners that ensure they are aware of the restrictions and what's allowed within the conservation easement. We're not really worried about the landowners that we work with to establish the easement, but oftentimes it's just a matter of, getting in touch with the future owners to make sure they're aware of what's going on. And then we have oversight by the IRS and the Land Trust Alliance. We are upheld to certain standards to maintain our accreditation. And so we have to maintain those as well. So, you have done a lot of reading. You've gone to this webinar. You've learned as much as you can about conservation easements. And at this point, you're hoping to move forward on the process. So what exactly does that look like? Well, to start, we have an initial conversation with your land trust of choice to see if it's a good match, if your interests are best fit, if your goals for the property can be best met by the land trust. The land trust often will come out to visit your property, see what you've got, learn the story of the ranch, get to know y'all. Um, and eventually we'll put together a report. So we'll bring that report to our lands committee for review and also to our board for review. So once that passes through our review, we'll send an engagement letter to you, the landowner, that basically says we intend to work with y'all to establish a conservation easement, and then we get a move on. So conservation easements are very similar they're essentially real estate transactions. So we go through a lot of the same processes for due diligence. So we need a current survey of the property. We need to run initial title commitment for a title policy. We do a mineral report if needed. We'll go out and do a baseline documentation report of the property. So this is just kind of setting a baseline. We'll record every building present on site so that we have a nice baseline for our future annual monitoring visits. And then we'll be drafting the conservation easement. So this we'll work with our lawyer, and y'all will work with the lawyer as well to draft the conservation easement together according to your wishes for the property. It'll go through several levels of legal review, and then we will close. At that point, you'll have a lifelong partner in INPAT, and your property will be protected in perpetuity by this conservation easement. So that is a quick run through of conservation easements. We're approaching the landowner testimonial portion of the webinar. I mentioned before I do that, I'd love to just touch on some work we are doing up in North Texas. So as we were looking at those land trends or the protected lands in Texas, we did see a gap of conserved lands in North Texas. And you also see some incredibly fast moving development. So Native Texas, oh boy, Native Prairies Association of Texas launched the North Texas Prairie Initiative in 2023. And this initiative is specifically focused on engaging local or North Texas-based landowners in conservation work. So helping landowners in establishing conservation easements on their properties. And we're excited to say that we've conserved a little over 1,100 acres in the past 2 years within this region through this initiative. So it's really great work and just something I wanted to touch on. One of the landowners that is joining us today, Margaret Drake, she is and her husband Bob own Drake Ranch, and that is actually one of our more recent success stories. So we have Drake Ranch, which is a gorgeous grassland in Somervell County. This is 83 acres. It's about a mile and a half just north of Glen Rose, downtown Glen Rose. And the preservation of this property could not come at a better time. You can't see it in these pictures, but there is a multiple hundred home neighborhood that is just 300 yards from this property. So it's very timely conservation success story, and we're excited to have Margaret here today to answer some questions. So that's just a quick look at some of the work we have going on in the North Texas region. That's my area of focus. If you are considering a conservation easement for your property, we welcome you to reach out. I'm the North Texas person, but we also have folks that cover land across the state. So please reach out. I will follow up via email with our contact information and other resources that can with more information about conservation easements. So as far as other ways to get involved with NPAT, like I said, our chapters host fantastic local opportunities. Again, definitely recommend visiting our website at texasprairies.org to check out some of our upcoming events. On that note, a few events, upcoming events of note. We are hosting our big Prairie Rendezvous fundraiser in October, on October 11th in Houston. So this is a big prairie party. It's a ton of fun. We actually just hosted one in Austin and it was a blast. So there'll be dancing, great music, and cider and beer. So it's a great party and highly recommend going and checking out the website to learn a little bit more. Again, that's in Houston. Um, and a couple events of note for y'all, for landowners, if we're hosting a couple landowner workshops up in North Texas. So we have one on November 1st, that's a Saturday in Daphne Prairie. And we are also hosting another landowner workshop at Recosa Ridge in Bosque County. So these are two really great opportunities to come out and see some prairie land restoration in action. We'll start off with presentations in the morning from some local experts, have a catered lunch, and then head out for a guided tour of some prairies in the afternoon. So again, check out our website to learn a little bit more about that. Okay, I think yep, about talked myself till I'm blue in the face. So I'm excited to turn the mic over. So for the next portion, we'll be talking with a couple landowners. We have Margaret Drake, who is the owner of Drake Ranch, which I just presented on. She's our recent North Texas Prairie Initiative success story. And we also have Carl and Kelly Abel here, who have just around 1,000 acres in protection through separate conservation easements up in Northeast Texas. So they've kind of piecemealed together this land and they do have done incredible restoration and regenerative grazing on this property. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. Hey, Margaret.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. How are you, Rachel?
Doing all right. Carl and Kelly, can y'all hear us?
We
Yes.
can you hear us?
Hi,
Awesome.
Rachel.
Hey, thank y'all so much for joining.
Sure.
Well, the first couple questions I have are for both families, both landowners. And the first one is, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and your property? What are your current goals with the land? And we can start with y'all since you're on the screen.
Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, we've had our conservation easements for the first one, 6 or 7 years, and the second one more recently completed a year ago or so. And we are primarily, we're a grazing land ecology here. The Native Prairie Association helped us walk through some of the initial steps to look at the possibility of having an easement. Our we put the easement on it, but it didn't really change anything. Our day-to-day operation is raising cattle and goats with a rotational grazing plan, and the rotational grazing plan is really probably the key management that we've implemented to restore so much of the native prairie ecology.
Well, I can say I've been out to the property a few times, and it's pretty remarkable to see the lush grasslands y'all have and the amount of restoration y'all have done through that regenerative ag. So it's been nice to see. Kelly, did you have anything to add?
Well, I was just say location. We're in Sulphur Bluff, Sulphur Springs area. We're about an hour and 45 minutes from the rapidly expanding metroplex. And yeah, just very, very grateful that we were able to put it both pieces under a conservation easement, and very grateful to INPAT for their guidance in that.
Thanks. Well, Margaret, do you mind telling us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Bob and I have lived on this land since 1980. When we got here, it was during that drought and that extra hot time in 1980, and it was very badly overgrazed by cattle at that time. We were young and didn't have much money, but we built our barns and put in our fences and cleared the land along the way as we were financially able. We both worked out of town and were not able to spend a whole lot of time on our property, but even so, we have walked every part of this property and know it by heart. After we cleared it, we bought a bag of wild grass seed and spread it out, and now we're reaping the benefit of that seed, and we enjoy seeing all of our different types of grasses. We have fond memories of the time I got the RTV stuck in the mud and Bob had to come pull me out with the tractor, and the time I set 4 brush piles on fire and only to discover there were 5 brush piles on fire. And other unforgettable moments on this land. Now that we're retired, almost every morning we take a walk down to the end of the property and back, which is a little over 2 miles, and we enjoy noticing the flowers that are blooming at certain times of the year, the plants that only grow in certain areas, the animal tracks and scat that we find along our walking path. Basically, our hearts live here and we don't intend to leave until we have to.
Thanks, Margaret. And Margaret, do you mind telling us how you first heard about conservation easements and what ultimately led you to commit to establishing a conservation easement on your property?
Well, I've been thinking about this for years. Every time we'd walk down our land, I'd see the new houses popping up on the side on above our property, and it would just break my heart to think that our property would be developed into 100 home sites eventually. So I knew that I had talked to a friend, and I knew there was some sort of agreement we could enter into, but I didn't have much idea about it. And When I started seriously thinking about it, I did a web search and found 5 or 6 organizations dedicated to such action in Texas. We then went to a seminar slash lunch, and I was really enthused after that meeting. Amber came down and took a tour of our land with us, and we discussed the various ins and outs of conservation easements. And everything she told us was really in agreement with our concept of a livable approach to a conservation easement. Since we're both getting older and we must plan for end of life, we decided to go ahead and put in the easement while we're still both able to enjoy the land.
Thank you. And I think, Margaret, that's a common story amongst landowners. They're wanting to secure the land while they can and, know that it's protected and enjoy that property.
Right.
So Carl and Kelly, same question to y'all. How did y'all first hear about easements, conservation easements, and what ultimately led you to commit to that?
I guess maybe somewhere around 2008 or 10, I read an article and I thought that was interesting that you showed the graph of sort of how conservation easements have started becoming more popular since the early 2000s. There wasn't a whole lot of information, but I read an article and then called some different land trusts and through a botanist that works for Texas Parks and Wildlife who visited our property. What year was that, kid? It must have been
Maybe 2015.
somewhere around 14, 15.
Mhm.
And we knew the ecology was very significant. It was significant to us, but he put it in even in a bigger light that it was quite a rare ecology that we actually had here. And through those initial discussions, he introduced us to the INPAT folks. And we started talking about, do y'all think y'all would be interested? We thought, yes, we would be. And the discussions just kind of continued from there, figuring out what we both kind of needed out of it. And that was very well aligned. As Margaret says, you began to look at what's going to be here when I'm gone. And I don't know, the older I get, the more I see life throws us a lot of curves that we never expected. And so to make sure we don't have any development on this prairie, this grassland, we were very much comforted, very much at peace of mind to know that it will remain a native grassland forever.
Yeah. Thank you. Kelly, I didn't know if you had anything to add.
Well, it's interesting in, our very early conversations in I guess it was like 2015, 2014, 15. My parents live in Plano. I went to, kind of grew up in the Metroplex, and, driving back and forth, and, in the early days, we moved out here in 2003. And in those early days, I mean, it was always, kind of a trek on I-30, but in 2012, 2013, it still wasn't that big a deal. But seeing the rapid development that was, we thought would be maybe 20 years, that seemed to be like 5 to 7 years. And that really, like, the more we drove that back and forth, we definitely talked and decided that's why we wanted to commit, because there was it was a goal that we wanted to make happen.
Yeah. Well, I hear that. I'm from what I want to call a small town out in west of Fort Worth, and I'm starting to see development happen there. We have a Taco Bell now, which saddens me.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm seeing,
exactly.
yeah, it used to be rolling prairie hills, and so it's a call to act now. There is,
Yeah, we had a videographer from Texas Parks and Wildlife come out in the spring, and did a video of our place, and he lives in Austin, and he was just shocked at that, from Dallas coming through Rockwall, Royce City, and coming out here. He said, Austin traffic is bad enough, but he had no idea. And so when he went back, he did some drone shots. And I've got a link to the video I'll share with you, Rachel, that you can share with everyone. I think he
please.
just finished the video, but it really is, I mean, we see it every day, but it's just shocking to see the
How fast we're losing it.
how
Yeah.
fast it's going, right?
Well, and it's a common story across Texas. Well, thanks. So Margaret, my next question is for y'all. So with the recent easement closing at Drake Ranch this summer, still fresh on your mind, could you tell us about how that process looked and how it went for y'all?
Actually, I was pretty surprised. I thought the process went, it was quite simple from our end. Rachel, you facilitated a lot of it and helped coordinate our interactions with the attorney and the appraiser and the mineral assessment fellow, and so that we could agree on all the various documents. One thing to note is that you folks provided a list of qualified contractors, for lack of a better word, that will provide legal assistance, mineral rights assessments, the appraisal, etc. So you make it real easy. All you have to do is go to one of the folks closest to your location, I guess you'd say.
Great, thanks. Well, and I know Carl and Kelly, I mean, you recently closed on an easement as well, but you also had one in place for some years. So considering having a conservation easement in place for the multiple years and looking back, what does it look like to have that easement in place post-closing? What are the requirements of y'all? What's life like with the easement?
Really, nothing has really changed. I mean, we've continued the grazing management plan. When we in order to get prepared for the closing, we had to put together a grazing management plan, since running cattle and goats on property was our future plan. But that really was not that difficult. NPAT and our third partner, the NRCS, were very pleased with what we had been doing here for 10 or 15 years. They liked the results that they were seeing and what was here, the ecology that was here because of the management practices. So basically, they had a very good grazing specialist that came and spent time. He and I went and looked at what we've been doing, the management we've been using, and basically, after he looked at it, assessed it, it was just a matter of capturing that on paper. But we really didn't change very much at all. And that goes with the management practices that we use today. They're pretty much, it's an adaptive multi-paddock grazing system so that we adapt as weather changes, drought, or whatever we have to deal with. That's incorporated into the plan, and we're allowed to make those adaptations. But the plan that's in place is basically what we've been doing for the past 15 or 20 years. So nothing really has changed, and it's allowed us to keep making a nice income from the cattle production that we do and goat production that we do here.
Thanks. Yeah, and that touches on the flexibility of these agreements. We don't want to be restricting income on properties. So there is a lot to be gained in the conservation easement towards protecting those rights, those ag rights. Kelly, did you have anything to add?
Well, and I was just going to say the thing that's changed is that we now have security, we have assurance that this land is going to be protected long after we're gone. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if our boys are going to, carry our goals forth. So it's just really nice to have that assurity that it's protected. We do hikes. We do a 4 seasons Able Grasslands hikes, and we just had one for the fall equinox. And just walking with our community through the grasslands, I was just feeling just very grateful, and just felt abundance, that knowing that this will be protected forever.
Yeah.
That's great.
Really brings a lot of peace of mind. Because stuff changes. We're here for only really a small period of time, and if we can ensure that this native prairie, this grassland, is here forever, that to me is very important. That as we spent many years in regenerating what was here and restoring a lot of the native prairie that had been, it was a culmination of several tracts of land that were treated various ways, but a lot of work went into making it what it is today. And then it's like, okay, I know that it's going to remain in a grassland and a native prairie state forever. That's really important.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all. And I think that's a benefit that a lot of landowners are looking for. Folks that have fallen in love with their properties and wanting that security, especially not knowing what the future holds and the many curveballs that life tends to throw. So my last couple questions are for both landowners. So one is there anything you'd recommend to a landowner that is considering a conservation easement for their property? Anything you wish that you would have known beforehand? And we can start, since y'all are on the screen, with Carl and Kelly.
Okay. Yeah, what comes to mind is patience, a lot more patience. The first I mean, it's a process. It's,
Three partners in the agreement.
yeah, we did ours, with Impact and then in RCS as well. And so our first, easement that went through, we had jumped through all the hoops and gotten all the paperwork in. It took quite a bit of time, and we kind of thought, okay, now it's in place. The second one will be a lot, a lot easier, a lot smoother. And things changed. And so it was and we went through COVID, and just there was a lot of things that happened in that time. So having realistic expectations, or and just a lot of patience, and definitely talking with a financial advisor, a tax advisor, doing your research, talking with as many people as you can, um, is really important.
And some people that, I mean, and if you need some more information or whatever, Rachel can put you in touch with us or whatever. There's a lot of, it's a very personal thing, committing your land to an easement, but the people that love the land, the ecology that's there and want to see it taken care of can understand that a little bit. And so they start to look at it really closely. And for us, we want to have it protected.
Thanks, Carl. And Margaret, same question to you.
Well, I pretty much want to ditto what they said. Go
Mhm.
ahead and if you're at all interested, research it, contact an organization that seems to align with your property and your needs, and go ahead and get the process started. What's that saying about the road to hell is paved with good intentions? I know lots of people who think about such a thing, but you have to act on it. And as an added note, your life and your lifestyle will not be altered. You'll just have one more issue off your shoulders that's been taken care of.
That's right.
Thanks, Margaret. Well, Margaret, you're doing such a great job talking up the conservation easements. I feel like you should join the team.
I'm a believer.
It's true though. It's good to just get a conversation at least started with a land trust just to see what the next steps might look like. So, great advice from both parties. And just a little background, Carl and Kelly mentioned it, that they did purchased easements through the federal government, through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And that process does take a lot of time and patience. And then alternatively, Margaret and her husband Bob, they did a donated easement. So that can tend to be a bit of a quicker process when you donate an easement. So my last question for the both of y'all, we can start with Margaret, is how do you feel now with the conservation easement in place?
Well, as everybody's already stated, Bob and I feel a peace of mind that our beloved property will be protected forever. It is literally a weight off our shoulders.
Yeah. Thanks, Margaret. Carl
Thank
and
you.
Kelly.
Yeah, same, relieved. Um,
Now all of the variables, I mean, we've got two boys that one just finished high school. The other one has 2 years left. So we have a huge question mark. They're going to pursue careers or whatever they're going to do. Yeah, we would love them. They love it here, but things happen. And so now we rest assured that it's going to be protected. It's going to stay like this. I
Great.
just wondered if any of the folks that are on the Zoom today have any questions for us that maybe we've overlooked or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great segue into our next portion is that Q&A. But first, I just wanted to extend a big thank you to you, Carl and Kelly Abel, and to Margaret Drake. Thank y'all for taking some time out of your Tuesday evening to share with us. I think in both of y'all's stories, a lot of landowners can find some similarities maybe in their own story. So thank you very much. So yeah, for this next portion, this is our turn to give the mic to our guests today. I know there's some questions building up in the chat, and I'd
Yeah,
also
we
like
have
to
some
take it.
great
Oh,
questions.
good. Good. I'd also love, yeah, maybe we can take the first few minutes to take advantage of, Margaret and Carl and Kelly's time while they're here. Does anybody have any questions for our landowners?
Well, I've already mentioned it in the chat, but my biggest question was I'm already sold on a conservation easement for our property, but there are some family members who are a little more reticent. And I just wonder if Carl and Kelly and Margaret have anything to offer on the best ways to convince other family members of the desire for a conservation easement.
Well, I can address that, Rachel. Frankly speaking, hello, David. How are you? Frankly speaking, I had to sell it to my husband, and he was quite reticent to begin with. But after I would say over the passage of time and continually mentioning it and mentioning how horrible it would be if they built 100 homes on our beloved property, he finally saw the light. So that's about the best way I can put it.
I guess, and from our perspective, what reservation would the folks that may not be sure or may be opposed to it, what reservations they would have, if they would want to see it developed or they want to see it subdivided, maybe that doesn't align so well with our wishes anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, keep the conversation going. It's it I think a lot is just clarifying the questions, getting answers to the questions as far as what are each end goals, and talking about succession and what's going to happen after we're gone, and not just us and our kids and their kids, but like in 100 years, and maybe a few drives through storage units and parking
Brand
lots,
new subdivision.
solar panels,
We have
and
a bunch of solar panels here too.
and then maybe just walking in nature and hearing the migrating birds that don't have a whole lot of cover anymore. So yeah, just keep the conversation going. It
Yeah.
is. I mean, we were lucky that we were both pretty much on the same page, but we had talked to a lot of people too, because you want to make sure that you fully understand this, that it's not, you don't want to force sale of anything, and it does take some time to to work through it, but just looking at the long-term benefits, you really do. You got to think, really long-term and way past our own
Well,
finite
that's
lives.
the other thing that it's not easy dealing with your mortality. That's what your kind of part of the equation is. And a lot of folks just rather not go there.
Yeah.
But we really kind of need to do that if we're going to have a viable outcome.
Can I say one more thing? I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about these conservation easements out there. A lot of the hesitation I picked up with in talking to people is that they think that you give up the ownership of the land and that you lose the control of the land. And so just holding webinars like this and educating people on what exactly a conservation easement is, I think is a big help right there.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And as we already said before, and Margaret pointed out, I mean, nothing really has changed for our land.
Yeah.
We're doing exactly, as we were doing prior to that. It's just what we don't want to happen is development. We don't want, little mini houses and storage units. That's what's happening all around us, for storage units.
And that, yeah, it touches on an important part of conservation easements, which I have forgotten. I need to drink some coffee. I'll touch back on that in a bit. But does anybody else have any more questions for our landowners today?
We had
There
a
are a lot
question.
of questions in the chat room.
All right,
Yes.
great.
We
And
had a
I'd
question
also,
from Deborah for Carl and Kelly. My understanding with working with NRCS is that you have to be a producer to qualify. You can't just conserve wildlife and native prairie. So I think they're seeking clarification.
I'm gonna turn that over. Amber, are you in the call for clarification on this?
I
I've
am.
okay,
And
go
and
ahead.
that's a great point. Absolutely. So the federal funding from NRCS is it is limited to ag producers. And so sometimes our prairie lands align. You know, you have grazable land. Like you heard Carl and Kelly say, they graze cattle and they graze goats on their property. Um, they are agriculture producers, but they also have very, very high quality prairie because of the way they manage those grazing operations. So um, yes, you do have to be a producer of some kind to qualify for NRCS federal funds.
Thanks. And I remembered my point about conservation easements. So I totally forgot. I was Carl and Kelly were talking about the way that they manage the land and how folks are often afraid that it's going to impact their management of the property in the future. And that's one of the great things about conservation easements is they're extremely flexible and they're also focused on essentially maintaining close to what is already happening on the property. So current usage is, as always, going to be protected. Okay, that was my forgotten point. I just wanted to add that. All right, Rachel, what other questions do we have?
Yeah, I'll just go in the order they came in. So
Okay.
Marvelyn asked, is the adjusted conservation land value reflected in the property tax valuation slash assessment?
I would say yes. So, in a recent property that we just closed, we worked with an appraisal group to conduct a specific appraisal for conservation easements, and they in that report they determined the cost of the property prior to the conservation easement and the cost of the property post conservation easement. So it's a formal process. We have more details on that. Amber, I don't know if I missed anything you want to touch on.
I think Marvelyn's question is specifically about the county appraisal, and
Mm,
we do not know if they take that into consideration. However, most of the properties that we work with are already under ag valuation or wildlife valuation, so there's no really lowering your property taxes from there. And I think that was a recurring question. I think there were a couple of folks who asked a similar question. Our landowners still pay those property taxes. And like I said, they're typically the lowest you're going to get anyways under ag or wildlife valuation. Um, the tax incentives that you may, and you probably will receive, although we do not provide tax or legal advice, as a disclaimer, are going to be that one time once you do a conservation easement. That difference in the appraised value is what you are giving up, and the IRS um, sees and allows you to take off your adjusted gross income for up to 15 years. To David's question earlier about how to incentivize, not incentivize, but how to um, maybe help family members understand the value of conservation easements and encourage them to get on board for the good reasons that we all want to see land protected. Another reason is for reducing estate taxes. So, that with that example, with the easy Aggie math that Rachel provided, that original property value was $2 million. And if your children inherit that today without a conservation easement, they're inheriting, $2,000 worth of estate taxes. However, if they're inheriting the after value, a property that's encumbered with a conservation easement, they're inheriting that $1.4 million property. And again, these are make-believe numbers, and we are not providing tax advice, but that's definitely something when you talk to your CPA or your financial planner, I would ask, what does this mean for what my children are going to inherit? And maybe that's a talking point to a spouse or adult children. We definitely want to have those kind of conversations we encourage them for you to speak with your family while you're thinking about a conservation easement.
Thank you. Edward asked, can the landowner ever change the agreement and end the conservation easement? There's a few questions, so do you want me to just read them out or
Go ahead, Rachel. I read
so,
it, but read the rest of the
yeah.
questions.
So can you ever change the conservation easement? Is a solar farm allowed? What kind of land improvements are done by INPAT? And can any new homes owned by the landowners be built? And that question got asked a few times, like what, if anything, could be built on a conservation easement?
So there are ways in the future to amend conservation easements. It is an additional cost, and it always has to be in favor of conservation, of the conservation values. So sometimes we see amendments where a landowner wants to add additional land into their property, and that's an easy one. That's a win for conservation. Sometimes we see amendments where a landowner wants to add a new building envelope or a new reserved right. We would have to have some trade-offs, or they'd want to, build a bigger building or an addition onto their house that wasn't originally a part of the conservation easement language. And if that's the case, we can look at what other changes we can make to make sure that there's more conservation happening. If we allow that to happen, then the landowner will have to give something up in for the sake of conservation. It's rare that we do amendments. That's why we like to get it right the first time and think about all of the what ifs, not only for our lifetime, or our children's lifetime, but well into the future. But amendments are possible as long as they're, at the end of the day, there's more conservation happening than loss of conservation. Solar farms. So we are protecting prairie, and typically typically a solar farm is not going to be consistent with a conservation easement. There might be a property that they want to designate part of their land or exclude it from the conservation easement because they see it as potential for solar. I haven't got that far with the landowner yet that wanted to see solar farms on their property, but typically it's something we would probably not be, we'd have to negotiate, and we probably would not be in favor of it on our prairie land. And then the last question was about reserving building envelopes. So all of these conservation easements are customizable depending on the landowner, the property, the goals of the property. Sometimes there's already existing buildings, and those are definitely recognized in our baseline documentation report. We know everything that's on the property before we finalize this conservation easement. And we typically have language in there that allows for you to replace, rebuild, expand maybe your home site a little bit more. But in some cases, you might have a property that you want, there's one home site on the property right now, and you have two kids. So in the future, you want to keep the one home site you have, but you want one additional building opportunity on the other side of the property so those kids can have their space. We would reserve that other building envelope. It would be a reserved right for the landowner that they may in the future have a cause to execute and actually build another home site there, but it's in a specific place. There are limitations to, again, negotiated. There's limitations to how big that building envelope is or how big the home site could be. That's all laid out in the conservation easement. They may reserve that right and never utilize it. They may say, we had this in place, but we never needed it. It may be 50 years or 100 years or never actually be used. So yes, we want landowners who are caring for the land, like the Drakes and the Abels, to be able to still live on the property, continue to manage it, and that might require more ag buildings or a second home or a guest house that becomes an Airbnb. We have language that we can put into the conservation easement to allow that.
Great. And maybe it was but are there any land improvements done by INPAT on these
Thank you. Yeah, we do not do work on whether it's improvements makes it sound like it's like a building or something, but we don't do restoration work on other people's land. We don't do any kind of other improvements on a property. We certainly are a hub for a lot of resources, a lot of cost share programs with the federal government, with Texas Parks and Wildlife and AgriLife. We can provide you with tools and resources for improvements, but we have over 2,300 acres of our own lands that we are active landowners on, and we're also trying to get that restoration work done.
Awesome. We have some great questions here. Trey asked, at some point in the future, if the land trust is no longer to serve as a trust, what happens to the easement? Does it transfer automatically to a different trust?
That's a great question. So we are a nonprofit, and in the case that we are no longer operational, um, there there is a clause in all of these conservation easements where if our nonprofit goes belly up and is no longer operating, a judge would assign our properties to another land trust, like the Nature Conservancy, Texas Land Conservancy, another local land trust who works in that area. We don't foresee that being the case. We're in really great financial shape. Like Rachel Seets said, we are an accredited organization. We've proven our financial stability and everything, but we've also seen at least two land trusts in Texas who have, after 25, 30 years of doing conservation, decided, hey, we're no longer doing this, and they actually actively transferred those conservation easements before they went belly up, before they closed their doors. They transferred those to other Texas land trusts. So it is possible, but and there is like I said, there is a part in the conservation easement that says it's not just going to be abandoned; it will be assigned, if not transferred to another land trust. Since I'm talking about another other land trust, I know there's a couple of people who asked, you know, why wouldn't I work with Texas Land Conservancy or the Nature Conservancy? Travis Audubon, who also operates as a land trust. And it's just we all work towards these same goals, but we all have a little bit different mission and flavor to the work that we do. Our organization is focused on prairie and native grassland habitats. We're also I can sell you all day on why NPAT is great. We have a chapter model, and so we have ways for local people to get involved and support conservation in their own areas, whether that's, um, in their local town or their county or within the chapter service area. Um, and we do provide a lot of landowner resources. There's other groups that do similar things that may focus less on grassland habitat, but focus more on agriculture operations, or maybe they're focused in one watershed or one region. So certainly you are welcome to shop around and kind of see who fits your personality or the goals of your property as you as a landowner. This is a permanent relationship with an organization, so it should be somewhere that you feel like there's trust and confidence and that your mission aligns with the organization.
Thanks,
Great.
Amber. Before our next question, I am aware that we are past our end time at 6:30. So for those of you that are needing to head out, we understand. But if you are able to stick around for the remaining questions, that's great. Just so everybody knows, we have been recording this webinar and we'll be following up with folks with a recording. So anybody that just needs to head on out, that is fine. We will get you a recording so that you can see the remaining questions and answers.
Great. Thanks, y'all. Randall asked, is there a minimum amount of acreage required? That was kind of general for conservation easements. And someone also asked if NPAT has a minimum acreage requirement.
You want that, Rachel? I'm just teasing. The answer that no one wants to hear is it depends. And it's hard to hear that answer, but it definitely depends, not only for NPAT, but also for any land trust that you work with. So there are costs associated, and I know this is another question. There are costs associated with doing a conservation easement. Um, and those are almost the same for if you're working with 50 acres or 100 acres or 1,000 acres. There's typically the same cost of a survey, appraisal, mineral report, all that kind of thing. We also this answers another question. We require a one-time stewardship and legal defense fund donation. That is a one-time donation to our organization that we use to determine it, a calculator that says if we have to come out because the IRS recognizing this as a charitable gift, we have to come out once a year and do this annual monitoring. And so our stewardship and legal defense calculator determines what it takes for us to drive out to Sulphur Bluff, Texas, or Glen Rose, Texas, or wherever, spend time doing a monitoring visit, and then come back and do our report. Some of that depends on how far we're driving, how much time we need to spend in the field. It's a lot different walking Margaret and Bob's 82 acres than it is with Carl and Kelly, who have over 1,000 acres. That's less walking and more, either in the work truck or driving around to see the property. So anyways, there are costs associated with this. And so where I was going was size, and it depends. So we typically, you know, we want to maximize the amount of time and energy that our organization is putting in, as well as the landowner, the cost associated with this, the landowner's putting in. I would say typically we're looking for, um, you know, I don't want to say 100 acres, but that's typically where that needle kind of, it depends. If it's higher quality prairie in an area that we are, like the North Texas Prairie Initiative, where we are focusing our efforts, we might look at something smaller. If it's, and there's a lot of development pressure there. If it's 1,000 acres, or I should say if it's 100 acres in West Texas, where maybe we're not seeing the pressure, we're not actively working there, it's a lot more resources for us to drive out to once a year, we're probably not going to take that 100 acres out in West Texas. So it just depends. I never want to tell a landowner that their property is too small to be protected. It's just a lot harder. And in the long term, 50 or 100 years from now, it's really hard to protect, you know, small islands of land that are surrounded by development. There's more encroachment of invasive species. There's more disturbance from um, everything at that point. So it depends. But I would say when you meet with a land trust, talk about, and we'll ask all the questions. So we make it easy for you, but we want to know what your property is like, what your goals are like, where it's at. Like I said, we focus on prairie, but if you're working with another group who focuses on the Brazos River watershed and you are right on the Brazos, they might want to look at 10 or 15 acres because it depends. It's very valuable to the conservation work that they're doing. And likewise, if there is high quality prairie or it's prairie adjacent to Carl and Kelly Abel's place, we want to protect 5 acres next to their 1,000 acres because that adds to a larger footprint, a larger connectivity of conservation lands. Sorry.
No, that's great. And it segues into some of the next questions of who pays for the closing paperwork, and is there a fee for the annual inspections by the trusts?
So I'll start with the last one first. So that stewardship and legal defense is that one-time payment. Typically, it's between 20 and $30,000, but it's one time and it pays for us forever to come out and do that annual monitoring. It also is that legal defense piece. So if we ever do have to defend your conservation easement in court, because your great great grandkids or the people that your great great grandkids sold the property to decided that they, are going to go against the conservation easement, we're not putting our nonprofit at risk, financial risk. We have that that legal defense fund to take them to court and defend the conservation easement. So that is one cost, and then all of the due diligence, the survey, the appraisal, the mineral report, the baseline, the legal fees. Um, all of those are typically paid for by the landowner. We do as much as we can to help reduce those costs, and don't let that stop you from the beginning. You know, have a conversation with us from the beginning, and let us know what, let us just have the conversation and figure out if there's a way that we can seek funds to help cover those costs if you're not able. But those are typically paid for by the landowner.
Thank you. There is a couple questions in the chat from Kim and Mark that are pretty specific to properties, and I don't know if we just want to refer that Rachel Seets will be sending out a follow-up email, and maybe we get in contact with some of those folks individually about some of these individual property questions, unless y'all want to answer those. I just know they'll get into the specifics conversations.
That's a great idea, Rachel. And we'd welcome that offline conversation with both of them. So just send us an email after this webinar.
Yeah, and I've saved all the questions, and Rachel and Amber will have those after this as well for additional follow-up. So back to some of the kind of Q&A questions. David asked, can a conservation easement protect against eminent domain?
We cannot stop eminent domain, but we are another partner with you in that it's no longer the pipeline company or whatever that's coming trying to ramrod through your property. It's not them only working with you. Um, we are now partners, and a separate negotiation that they have to have when they are trying to come through property. Sometimes that's enough of a barrier that now they have to work with two people, and one of us is a nonprofit. It looks bad to stop them. So sometimes it's worth it for that pipeline or whatever the agency is to go around and go an alternative route. Um, and then sometimes it's just, it makes it a little bit more difficult for the pipeline company. They do it anyways, but we can't stop eminent domain. I will say if you ever have, like Carl and Kelly have a federally funded conservation easement, that is a big red flag for any kind of eminent domain because there's public dollars that are now intermingled with that conservation. So it's a lot. It would take a whole lot more to get a pipeline through a property that has federal dollars involved.
Great. Spencer asked, are NPAT conservation preferences different from Nature Conservancy or Texas Land Conservancy? Does NPAT focus on remnant prairie versus ag land being converted to native grasses? And then we answered their question kind of about minimum acreage.
Yeah, so like I said, all of these are great groups that we are partners with. I mentioned or Rachel mentioned at the very beginning that we own 11 properties and over 2,300 acres. Several of our properties have conservation easements on them held by the Nature Conservancy, Texas Land Conservancy, Bayou Land Conservancy, other groups. We can't hold our own conservation easements. So in those situations that we do have conservation easements, those are our partners, those are our buddies. So they are wonderful organizations, good to work with. Everybody has their own mission, and I would say that we certainly are looking for high quality prairie to work with, whether it's remnant or restored grassland habitat, and a lot of times that does work consistently with rangeland, like Carlin Kelly's example. Margaret Drake also, grazes her property as well. So grazing can be consistent with prairie habitat and native grasslands. We don't really do row crops. There's a few properties that we have that that's built into the easement is row crops. But typically that's not what we're looking to protect. That's not part of our mission. But there are other groups out there who are doing agriculture, land protection, and I would pick up the phone and say, talk to our friends at Texas Agricultural Land Trust, another great organization. If you don't know who works in your area, you can go onto either the Texas Land Trust Council's website and see, or if you're not in Texas, and I know there was a question about that, if you're not in Texas, the Land Trust Alliance website, they have Find a Land Trust altogether, findalandtrust.org. And you can say I'm in Love County, Oklahoma, or McLennan County, Texas, or wherever, and it'll help you identify who's working there.
Wonderful. David asked, I already have a wildlife management exemption. Would a conservation easement reduce property taxes any further?
They do not. It's typically wildlife or ag valuation is as low as you go.
Marcia asks, does NPAT pay the landowner anything upfront for a conservation easement? And if so, what is the basis for that amount?
We do not pay landowners for conservation easements in the case that we are able to help a landowner with a purchased or bargain sale conservation easement. We are leveraging those funds from foundations or from NRCS, the USDA NRCS funds, and those are typically paid at closing. And it's based on what the basis is, if that's helpful. It's based on that appraisal. So in Rachel's example of the $2 million property being reduced to $1.4 million, that the conservation value was what was the value that was lost, so $600,000. So if the Natural Resource Conservation Service has an agreement with the landowner to pay them 50%, in that example, it'd be $300,000. Or if we found a donor or a foundation to help cover that cost, it would be $600,000 or less, depending on the percentage we're paying them. But it is at closing and it's based on that appraisal.
Great. I want everyone to know we've got their questions. Some of them are a little bit repeat, but so I think we kind of went over James' question of what would go into, but maybe if anybody wants to elaborate, or any of our other landowners, but what goes into that decision of choosing one organization over another for the land trust having the conservation easement?
I'll see if Kelly and Carl, or if Margaret, if any of y'all want to answer that, because I know you shopped around, Carl and Kelly.
We did look at some different ones. Initially, most of the entities that would hold the easement were not nearly as active in the first easement we did. NPAT was, and they guided us through the process, and they basically interacted with NRCS to make all that part of it happen. So that's who we went with. And the second one was very similar. Of course, as Kelly said, we thought it was going to be, oh, we've done the first one. We're going to follow that pattern and we're going to be just no problem. But the NRCS had their whole staff completely turned over. So they had a lot of learning to do with the people that were kind of doing that easement section of that business, that part of what they do. So it took even longer on the second one, but NPAT stayed with it. Amber and some others did a great job and guided us through, very straightforward and very honest. And we appreciate that.
Yeah, I just like to say, yeah, NPAT, they're very likable, and integrity. We felt the integrity through the whole process.
Hey, Amber. This is Jeff. Can
Hey,
I
Jeff.
add something to that?
Mhm.
That question? And I'm biased, of course, being a staff member of NPAT, but I just wanted to say that the fact that we have this chapter structure is unique. And we've got folks here on the call, I've seen her tonight, like Carl and Kelly and Marvelyn and Trey and Diana from our Fayette chapter and Marcia from our Fort Worth chapter. These chapters have members of like-minded people who want to conserve and protect nature, to support each other through the process. And folks like Marcia and Carl and Kelly and Dinah and Marvelyn and Trey are great ambassadors working with others in their communities to help each other, to support each other, to share their knowledge, their wisdom on how to protect land and go through the process and the importance and value of conservation. So that's something that's unique, I think, amongst land trust here in Texas. And we're proud of our education aspect of what we do. So thank you all to our landowners and members who do that.
Thanks, Jeff. I think we also touched on Spencer's other question a little bit, but just to reiterate, if conservation easements can be tailored to specific family needs, like allowing certain development of like a house or a barn or something like that versus wholesale development.
Yeah, definitely depends on the property, depends on, like, we'll even allow a subdivision if it's a large enough property that it makes sense. We don't want to fragment land more, but if it's a larger property, we would allow one, possibly one subdivision. If it, if it makes sense ecologically that there's, where a landowner wants to have a second or third building envelope reserved, those are all negotiable things. Um, I think I saw in their question that they asked about another family member. Um, Typically the ownership stays the same. So it's not like you can build a house and then sell that house to an uncle, a cousin, a brother, whatever. But certainly if you had that reserved right for another building envelope, they could lease the house to someone else. Someone else could live on the property. So we're flexible. We definitely want to allow people to continue to live and work on a property.
Great. So we're getting towards the end. I want to make sure I kind of I know we talked about landowners will continue to pay property taxes on the conservation easements. We're kind of getting into some questions about if the landowner donates those properties as fee simple, does the land trust then pay any taxes on those lands, or does the landowner donating it pay anything? And Cynthia asked, if land is donated to a land trust in fee simple, does the trust have the right to determine what the highest and best use of that tract is? Not as ag land, or it could be best exchanged or sold and funds used to purchase a more desirable prairie remnant held by the trust.
Those are great questions.
Mhm.
Our Fayette chapter, it just hosted recently um, basically estate planning for the conservationist webinar similar to this or workshop online like this. If you go onto our website, texasprairie.org, and you look for the Fayette chapter, there is a recording of that webinar, and we talk about some of these things. I just want to share that. So if you want to do a little bit more of a deep dive, and there's some resources, um, an estate planning attorney who's listed on there as well and answered a lot of questions. Um, but if we were donated a property, number one, I always tell donors, landowners, if you're going to do something like that, if you're going to donate a property or anything else, whether it's money or property of whatever kind, um, have a conversation with that nonprofit during your lifetime, so that number one, we can honor you while you're alive and with us, whether that's anonymously, very quietly, or whether that's a big splash. We want to show our appreciation to you while we have you. But then also so that we can ask a lot of questions about what you want to do with that property. Um, if we if we know in advance, we can possibly say, yes, absolutely, we can do whatever your wishes are. Um, or we can say, well, our organization isn't quite set up that way. Either no, we would not take that property, or this is what we would do with it. But have those conversations. I think it was I don't know if it was Margaret or Carl who said something about kind of addressing our mortality, but have that conversation. It's not as crazy to think about, um, you know, what's next for your property. Um, but if we're given property, if someone wants to donate skyrise condominium in Houston tomorrow to us, we will 100% take that and we will sell it and we will use the value of it to either purchase prairie or protect more conservation easements. There is value to that gift, and we will certainly honor it in our mission to protect more prairie across the state. If someone wanted to donate their prairie property and it's large enough and of the quality that we can own it and manage it, that might be a decision that we make. Or we might make the decision to flip it, to put a conservation easement on it, and then to sell it to a landowner who is now a partner with us in that journey. And so those are options. If someone donates, 5 acres, again, something that might be smaller than what we would normally do a conservation easement or owning land, that is where we might have to make that decision to possibly sell the property. But if we have that conversation with a donor during their lifetime, then we have the opportunity to say, hey, we will take this and we will use it to further our mission. But we're not able to at this point because of our capacity. Eight staff members working across the state, nonprofit, stretched thin and everything. We're not able to put a conservation easement or own your 5 acres, in perpetuity. So I hope I answered that question, but again, it depends and it's so hard, but have that conversation with any nonprofit, even if it's the SPCA or any, Houston Audubon or Travis Audubon, anyone you're thinking about making a donation to like that. So about taxes, if we are gifted, if NPAT, Native Prairies Association of Texas, is gifted land, I don't think that we are taxed, and I think that that gift counts as a charitable donation to that landowner who gifts it to us if it's still during their lifetime. I'm not sure what that looks like, for estate taxes for children. Um, the land that we own right now, we do not pay taxes for, except if it's over a certain number of acres in a county. There's so many, for nonprofits in Texas, there's so many acres that we can own tax-free. And then once we get to that point, we have to start paying taxes. And like many of you landowners, we typically, if we have to do that, go through ag or wildlife valuation to lower those taxes. So there's only one county in Texas where we own enough land that we pay taxes, and that's in Mitchell County, where we have our Madden Prairie Preserve. We own about 1,400 acres in Mitchell County. So we pay a little bit of taxes, and we continue to do wildlife valuation out there. So we have to report to our county just like all of you. I hope that answered questions.
Amazing, Amber. Thank you. There was the last couple ones. One was for you in particular, but or if folks want to hop on to ask these last questions. Randall had asked, how much did you say that one-time donation was? I'm not sure, Randall, if that was about the due diligence and the stewardship fund, or if that was about these land donations that some folks make. So
probably that stewardship and legal defense fund, and it depends. I want to say realistically that range is between if it's really close to one of, to our headquarters or, where we are not traveling very far to that, it's probably, closer to 18,000. And if it's further out, I'm just thinking about what I've quoted our most recent landowners. It's somewhere between 18 and 40,000, 30,000, something like that. It just depends. We had one in Travis County, which is 40 miles from our headquarters, and that was close to 18,000. We had one in Coleman County recently that was about 30,000. So the further you get away from us, the more likely we have to have an overnight stay at a hotel, or the bigger the property, we might have to spend 4 or 5 hours trekking around. So it just depends, but $20 to $30,000 around that range. And it is fully tax deductible, just as if you were writing a check to, the American Red Cross or your local nonprofit. David, I will be at your place on October 25th. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. Yes. Thank y'all so
I'm
much.
looking forward to showing it off to you.
In cooler weather. I'm looking forward to cooler weather.
Amazing. Y'all are a wealth of knowledge. We had so many thanks and appreciation for the programming tonight. Like I said, I'll share these questions with Amber and Rachel's got some follow-up that she'll be sending out later on. So I'll let you all have any closing remarks.
Thanks, Rachel. You basically covered it. Thanks to everyone for joining us on a Tuesday evening, and a huge thanks to you, Rachel, for managing the chat, and to Amber Arsenault. Like I said, she's an encyclopedic in her knowledge of easements and such a wealth of information. I will be following up with everybody with a recording of this webinar for y'all's use. Please share with any and everyone that might be interested. I'll also be sure to include some other relevant resources that we mentioned during this webinar with y'all. Alrighty, well, thank you all and have a lovely evening.